Welcome to your year 2021 Zodiac Forecast. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd be honoured if you'd subscribe to my channel. Now I'm going to provide a penetrative insight for each of the 12 zodiac signs, so please stay with me for that. But just to say, if you'd like to ascend beyond your zodiac sign, which is just based on the location of the sun and how the planets interact with that, and find out what this new year will hold for you as an individual, there is nothing more accurate and telling than a personal forecast. Now you can get your 12-month personal forecast for 2021 plus a character analysis for 30% off, a special offer. Please see the link below. But also know, if you order in 2020, I'll give you the rest of 2020 free. So if you order in October, you get October, November, December, plus the following 12 months. Now your zodiac forecast is going to be of great interest to you, of course, and it does give us a fascinating insight into what we can expect. But of course, the zodiac or the horoscope contains much more information than just our sun. And that's where that personal horoscope comes in. But also, as we start each year, we have a solar return. And I want you to think of that solar return at midnight on the 1st of January 2021 as like your personal birth chart. It gives us a blueprint of what we can all expect collectively for this new year. So I'm going to share that information next. But when I go into your zodiac forecast, I'll be sharing different wheels, the different eclipses, to give you a really big opportunity to get a feel for what's coming for you. But astrology is basically the study of time. And when events happen in the past, when particular planetary alignments occur, when we look forwards to see when those alignments will happen again, it gives us a bit of a clue of what we can expect. And the fascinating thing, of course, is that as 2020 came to a close on the 5th of December, Saturn moved back into Aquarius. It had been there from the 22nd of March to the 2nd of August, 2020. But it moves from the cold sign of Capricorn, which it governs in its dignity. It's the sole ruler of Capricorn. And it moved into the sign of Aquarius, where it's the co-regent, along with Uranus. Now it was joined on the 20th of December by Jupiter. And then on the 21st of December, they came into a conjunction. And that conjunction is still there. It's not quite exact, but it's still there as we begin this new year. Now, what we can learn from those past events is that the last time this happened was in fact in 1405. So a very, very long time ago, and that was on the 7th of January. And I think what began at that time was the Cultural Revolution, in a way. So what we can expect this year is a revolution, that's for sure. And of course, we were seeing elements of that revolution beginning last year. And part of the revolution can be evolution. It doesn't always have to be turbulent, but there are certain parts of what happened in 2020 that were, of course, very turbulent. Now, the conjunction that goes between the planets of Jupiter, which is about expansion and growth and optimism, and Saturn, which is about resistance, obstacles, boundaries, tradition, usually happens just under every 20 years, about 19.8 years. This is because Jupiter takes 11.8 years to go through its cycle, and Saturn takes 29.5 years to complete its cycle. And over the last 1,000 years, predominantly, the three signs that this conjunction has occurred in most of all are of Sagittarius, Capricorn, and Pisces. So that's what makes this Aquarius conjunction so absolutely blindingly exciting. Now, it's also true to say that the eclipse cycle that we welcomed in on the 14th of December 2020 was the Saros cycle that is featuring the polar axes of Sagittarius and Gemini. Now that began on the 30th of May 1984 in the sign of Gemini with a solar eclipse. And if we look back to when eclipse cycles begin, that gives us a big idea of what they may bring in their wake. So that one had Saturn and Mars conjunct in the sign of Scorpio, very much to do with finance, but also to do with desire, could even say lust. But Saturn, of course, is about discipline, it's about those structures, and Mars, certainly in its second home zone of Scorpio, is very much about desire. So you can see that a certain amount of repression would come from that particular conjunction, but also the potential to work very hard on resources. And I think in terms of the material world, there's been a lot of development since 1984, and some people would argue a lot of growth. But on the other side of the heavens, where the eclipse occurred, not only did we have the solar eclipse in the wonderful, quick-witted Gemini, we also had Venus there, which is very flirty and alluring and attractive. But we also had Chiron, and that is the wounded healer, and that was conjunct the North Node and Venus. So for me, this pattern that we're beginning this year, or picking up the thread of, which has been rejuvenated by the solar eclipse in Sagittarius on the 14th of December, which forged an amazingly positive angle to Mars. So I think we're all going to be feeling a lot more hopeful as we come to the end of this year, because last year, 2020, was just so terribly trying. I think we are going to have a much greater sense of momentum, a much greater sense that something is shifting and moving in our consciousness, our way of being. But I think that gathering of energy back in 1984 in Gemini was really a lot to do with the way society has changed since then, not just in a material sense, but also in a social sense. So we've seen a mass transformation in the way we consume information, the media, which has come through the internet, and of course printed media has declined quite sharply, but they're very much governed by the sign of Gemini. So we could say that Chiron, the wounded healer, being in that part of the situation in conjunction with Venus, points towards a wound in what we believe in. And I think with that energy all clustered together based on universal central time in the 8th house of transformation, very Scorpionic itself, and Mars and Saturn in conjunction in Scorpio, we have had a lot of lust since 1984, and we have had a lot of challenges to ideas, because if we go back to that time, I think there was much more of an orthodox that most people were expected to fit into. People have found their voices, they expect to have their voice. Now on the other side of the heavens, with the solar eclipse that occurred on the 14th of December 2020, Sagittarius energy is about the higher principle of communication. So it's about philosophy, it's about the intellect, it's about history, travel, it's about borders. It can be about laws and regulations, but it's very much to do with trying to find the higher principles of society. And because it forged an amazing link with Mars, I think both being fire signs, after the really pulverizing difficulties of 2020, which saw the end of an eclipse cycle between the axes of Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, so that's very much to do with emotion, the family, security, the seas, the waters, if you like, and on the other side, the harsh, cold reality of business, big industries, and materialism in perhaps its most extreme form, which has battled with the need to find emotional security on the other side of the heavens in Cancer. So we've had this big battle going on over the last couple of years, which has really been very difficult. And I feel that obviously there are some institutions, some business strands, some countries which will try to withhold or to hold on to power in a very oppressive way. And on the other side of the heavens, we had the moon is the repressed emotions that have been held down for a long time, especially to do with civil rights and people speaking up much more ardently about what they want. So the Sagittarius energy that is coming along, which re-evokes that first 1984 eclipse in Gemini, when this Saros eclipse cycle began, is very much about communication and information. So this year we're going to see a lot of sharing of ideas, that's for sure. And of course, we're seeing a lot of polarization in people's viewpoints and a lot of outspoken expression of ideas, and sometimes not enough tolerance. So that's an interesting principle. So as we come into this new year, although Saturn is the co-ruler of Aquarius, and of course it was co-present with Jupiter over the last year as Jupiter made its way through the sign of Capricorn, where of course it's not at its best, it's in its fall, and we've had a fall in the stock market. And also if we look back to when Jupiter and Pluto were last together, that was in 2008 in Capricorn, we had a fall in the stock market. If we go back to that eclipse cycle beginning in 1984, guess where Jupiter was? Yes, in Capricorn. And guess what happened that year? Yes, we had a fall in the stock market. It wasn't perhaps as quite as catastrophic as 2008 or perhaps even 2020. And that might be because when Saturn and Mars are together, particularly in the sign of Scorpio, which is very much about marshalling investments and pensions and all the rest of it, I think that Saturn was probably a stabilising influence, and all that Gemini stuff was in the 8th house of business anyway. But the Dow Jones did shrink 4% in 1984, so we can see as Jupiter makes its way through Capricorn every 12 years or so, it's not for the best when it comes for finance, investment, business generally. So as we come into this new year, Jupiter and Saturn are together and they are still co-present. And some astrologers would argue, therefore, that because Saturn is the co-ruler of Aquarius, the traditional ruler, that some of the more cool, repressive energies of Capricorn will still be to the fore. And they could be right. But for me, I think it's more about detachment. So what we're going to get over the next 2.25 years, as Saturn makes its way through the sign of Aquarius, is the Aquarius energies of kindness, of fairness, of truth can be melded to the more reserved nature of Saturn. So, for example, home working is very Aquarius, which has come about more because of COVID-19. It's very Aquarius, very independent. It's using technology, which Aquarius also welcomes for its modern ruler of Uranus. But in actual fact, I think it's going to lead to a lot of creeping isolation. I think people could kind of start to see that the world could become a kind of dystopianly detached place, which is not necessarily quite the utopia that people talk about for the Aquarian age. But that's where Jupiter can be a modifying influence for the cooler energies of Saturn. And I think the two together, as we turn into this new year, are going to be for the good. So this year is going to see Sagittarius and Gemini eclipse energy, apart from one lunar eclipse which will occur in the sign of Taurus. But what's really important is that Neptune, the planet of dreams, is going to be impacting all of these eclipses and also the North Node as we go through the whole of this year. The North Node is the kind of emotional direction of travel or society. It's in Gemini. It returns to 1 degree Gemini by the end of the year. But of course it's an air sign, just like Saturn and Jupiter begin the year in. So that airiness can be there, but that watery, eroding energy of Neptune can provide distortion. And I think the thing that's really going to be at stake this year, just as much as it has been in recent years, is the whole concept of the truth. You know, when we've got big media platforms saying it's not their role to govern the truthfulness or accuracy of what people say because everyone is entitled to an opinion, we're heading into really dark territory in my viewpoint. Traditional media, even if you're not a fan, has to live to certain parameters that come from regulation, even if sometimes they have stepped outside of it, probably quite often. But there is some regulation in place, whereas a lot of new media doesn't have any regulation, and that means that truth or facts get distorted to suit particular people's agendas. And I think we are going to still continue to have a lot of that in 2021. Now, the other thing that perhaps is not quite so well known is that although Jupiter will like being in Aquarius, and it is going to be much more expansive than it has been in the sign of Capricorn, it's not going to stay in Aquarius for the whole of this year. It's going to move mid-May into the sign of Pisces, and it's going to be there through to the 27th of July. Now, Jupiter, in fact, is the ruling planet or the co-ruler of Pisces, so it's returning home. And so that's an interesting one, but it does start to go into retrograde from the 20th of June for 4 months. So I think we might see a revival initially in the cruise industry by the middle of May. We might see bookings starting over again if COVID is coming back under a bit more control, as I believe it will. But I feel that once that retrograde begins, it is going to be very interesting how that affects the cruise industry. And the other thing I need to tell you is that in astrology, when we take a particular point like that solar return at the start of the year, we get a map just like your personal horoscope. And that solar return, I've created it based on universal central time. And the ascendant is actually in Libra, which is very much about finding balance. But the midpoint between the sun and the moon's in the sign of Leo as we begin this new year, and the sun will be in Capricorn as usual. So the midpoint between the two is 21 degrees in Libra. So this is going to be very much a Libran year. And 21 degrees Libra is quite a fascinating point, because it is going to be next to, or very close to, a fixed star which has the characteristic of both Saturn and Jupiter. And that fixed star is called Foramen. And Foramen is very much to do with journeys, particularly sea journeys. It's said to be broadly optimistic, but it can see passages from quite tumultuous events to much more enlightened understanding. And that seems to be where the world is at the moment. We have an opportunity to change how things are, but just finding a vaccine for COVID is not the answer. Many of us won't take it. And of course, many of us don't want to be ruled by fear, so we're going to carry on our lives. So it's an interesting fixed star to have on that midpoint, but also the midpoint is ruled in terms of the 12th harmonic, or the Dward, by the sign of Gemini. So, I'm talking about this Saros Eclipse series being very much to do with the polarities of Gemini and Sagittarius. Gemini, quick wits, communications, sharing of information, and the higher energy of Sagittarius. Now, like all zodiac signs, I'm not talking in terms of your zodiac sign or how you live within your zodiac sign, because we all have a choice to live to the best of our zodiac signs, or there is a more base instinct within each zodiac sign, and everybody has a choice. But this year predominantly is going to be about finding balance, it is going to be about communication, and it is going to be about trying to find a search for truth. Now, I mentioned before, what did I say for 2020? Well, the midpoint was actually in Aquarius, and it was conjunct Venus. And Venus in Aquarius is very much about us as a collective. And also it was in the 4th house, which is about our sense of security. But we also had Neptune conjunct the moon as the solar return began for 2020. Quite incredible. So the Neptune in the sign of Pisces, which it governs, conjunct the moon. And Neptune is very much about gases, infections. It can be about uncontainable situations. It can be about distortion. It was also potentially very much about spirituality. It's about healing. But having that conjunct the moon for the world collective, where we all found out that wherever we lived in the world, we were all connected to the same issue like never before. That's quite extraordinary. And the other thing that all astrologers knew, of course, was that we had the posse in Capricorn of Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto. So most astrologers believed that there would be a crash in the stock market, so we weren't wrong about that. But the implications of this infection, COVID-19, very much was there in the stars. So this year, you can see that Neptune energies are still going to be very important, and that potential for distortion or dishonesty, perhaps from politicians particularly. It can be to do with how information is shared on social media platforms particularly, but it can also be to do with our imagination, or that we have choices about the way we want to live our lives. But Sagittarius generally is very much about travel, and I think the travel industry will get revived this year, but I think we're going to see changes. So we're going to see more temperature tests at airports and ports. We may see some very quick COVID tests being enacted, which will give very quick results, and we'll start to see more and more travel picking up. It's a fact, because people don't like to be contained. And Sagittarius energy is about adventurism. It's about being very independent. And last year was very much about being locked in, which was very uncomfortable for many of us, because above all else, Sagittarius energy is about individual freedom. So this year is a very, very exciting year. It does give us an opportunity to bounce back. It's not going to be without big challenges. We do have a very pressing right angle between Saturn and Uranus, the two rulers of Aquarius, which is going to go on to about the 31st of July. It comes back from around about the last 5 days of November to the end of the year. And that's a really difficult aspect, I feel, because Uranus, of course, is in the sign of Taurus, and that's very much to do with resisting change. Taurus likes continuity, whereas Uranus likes to shake things up. So our attitude to the earth, environmentalism, how we live, how we consume, which Taurus energy is very much about as well. It's what we enjoy eating, drinking, spending our money on. Bit of luxury. We love, all of us love a bit of luxury. But that's being tempered by this potential new world order that Jupiter and Saturn initially are bringing in the sign of Aquarius, plus that solar eclipse energy that really came in with such a hurtling ferocity in its wonderful trine with Mars on the 14th of December. We've had Venus move in mid-month December into the sign of Sagittarius. So it's a much freer, looser energy as we come into this new year. But stay with me now to get the inside track on your zodiac sign, because I really feel that this is a year that we need to be informed about like no other. Hello Capricorn, welcome to your year 2021 zodiac forecast. I'm going to show you the themes for this year that are going to affect Capricorns in general, or if you have an ascendant in Capricorn. If you'd like to know what the year will hold for you as an individual, specifically based on your personal data of time, date and place of birth, please see the link beneath this video. If you order in 2020, you can get the rest of the year 3, and in 21 from the time of your order, a full 12 months. But your forecast and character analysis will give you peerless insights into when to time your moves for this period of time. But it's true to say that a big change was instigated just before the end of 2020. And this saw a eclipse series shift from your sign and Cancer that have been going on over the last couple of years into the sign of Sagittarius and Gemini. What do those mean for you? Well, Sagittarius is the sign before yours, so that's to do with the 12th house, which is very much to do with the shadow side of our nature. It can be to do with a more spiritual dimension. On the other side of the heavens, the sign of Gemini for you is very much about practicalities. It's about work, health, fitness, diet, what we eat, how we structure our situations. And those are going to be the major themes of 2021. Also, Uranus, the planet of surprises, continues in the most glorious location for you in the sign of Taurus, which is very much about your creativity. And this is pushing you to change things up, to embrace the side of your nature that can be more experimental. You have a great determination to keep going in terms of your goals and ambitions. This is saying don't let your steadfastness pulverize your passion. It's important to show flair as well as that application and perspiration, which is such a big part of your nature. Now, as we go through the turn of the year, we have a solar return, which provides a backdrop for the whole of the year. The standout detail for me, for you, is the fact that the sun in your sign is angling to Uranus in an exact trine. So it's saying to you, by welcoming change, you can probably create a lot of opportunities for success this year. Also, if we take the point between the sun in your sign and the moon, which is in Leo, we have a midpoint, which is the balance of the more male and female energies of the heavens. And for you, this puts the midpoint in your sector of success. So there is a real chance for you to take steps forwards to embrace your big goals. And this is very much in keeping with your base nature. There are some more complex changes. Saturn, your ruler, has moved out of your sign. It did so on the 14th of December. And it's now in Aquarius, the next sign. Now, it still governs Aquarius, just in a bit of a different way. And it's alongside Jupiter as this new year begins. Jupiter also has left your sign, where it was last year on its 12-year cycle. Well, just under 12 years, about 11.8 years. So this combination between Jupiter and Saturn hasn't happened for many, many hundreds of years. So it's quite rare. And it's kind of saying to you that the way that you value things, value yourself, or your attitude to everyday resources is likely to go through a change this year. And you might welcome some of those changes, and some of them may seem to come about because of changes in your environment. Now, of course, we're all dealing with the impact of COVID, and that's had a big impact generally on the world markets, on the travel, the ability to travel freely, the holiday industry, and so forth and so on. So that's the kind of environmental change that Saturn can have on your situation. But as this new year begins, Mars, the planet of passion, is in your sector of the home, where it was for the last 6 months of last year. If you felt very unsettled where you live in that period of time, the chances are, because of its angle to Pluto still in your sign as this year begins, that you could be itching to change something about your residency. It could be to make it bigger, better. It could be to downsize. It could be to move altogether. Maybe this relationship between Mars and Pluto, which is very earnest, quite forceful, quite intense, could see you being more direct in expressing your needs to someone close to you, be it a family member, a partner, an offspring, especially if they seem to be resistant to your point of view or your way of needing to approach things. And because Uranus is clashing with Saturn, your ruler, from the middle of January through to the end of July, I think it's true to say that even if you have to take some short-term collateral, if you do want to change your life up, as far as your income is concerned, you might do it if you feel your life has become a little bit too predictable, quite frankly, and that you are craving much more excitement. Because you are one of the safest pair of hands in the zodiac, people do rely upon you a lot. You're a cardinal sign, so therefore you're a leader. But this year, because of that Eclipse series, you're being asked to tune into the psychology of yourself like never before. And because Uranus is pushing you to embrace your individuality much more, even if it means you have to step outside your comfort zone, and obviously security is very important to you, it could see you making that change. And that change could be to where you live, simply because Mars is in the fourth house as you begin this year, and it's in that sharp right angle with Pluto. And that's giving you a more direct yearning for some kind of instant need to meet your changing persona, because we're all evolving the whole time. But over the last couple of years, as we've had this eclipse series in your sign and Cancer, it has been a bit of a dust-up between your practicality and the Cancer more feeling approach to life. But I feel that this year you will feel a change. It is going to be a more spiritual time for you. You do need to get in touch with your deeper feelings. Just living in the more practical, material side of your being is not going to be enough. You need to ascend above this, quite frankly. And I say this with quite a Capricornian nature. Got a strong 10th house and also my Mercury in Capricorn too. So yes, we're going to have to flex a little bit and be more open to the new way of doing things that is undoubtedly going to be coming in. Now, because Saturn does move into your second house, it is possible that something you've relied upon as for an income for some while could change. But because Jupiter's there as well, the planet of opportunity, it could change for the better. It could mean that by working very hard and investing your energies in a slightly different way, you can get a return on something that you've put years of effort into and now start to see the tangible rewards. So I think having Jupiter next to Saturn is a real stroke of luck for you as this year begins, in a way that some other signs won't benefit from, because this is about resources. But it is true that Jupiter goes through an erratic pattern this year, and in the middle of May it actually moves into your sector of ideas, neighbours, siblings, short-term travel, expressing your points of view. It's going to be there into July. So that's glorious. It does go retrograde from the middle of June. It goes retrograde every year for 4 months, and that can see a slowing down, and then it comes back into Aquarius. So the second half of the year can see you back on the case, trying to improve your lot around your resources, but in a more creative way, I feel. Now, because the Mercury retrogrades last year were all in water signs, it did lead to a lot of confusion, a lack of clarity. And I think certainly the early one in Pisces was a lot to do with the spread of COVID, because governments weren't reacting in a kind of logical enough way, because Mercury is not at its best in Pisces. Well, this year, it starts off the year in your sign, so it gives you the chance to be very single-minded in your approach, but it does switch into Aquarius, and by the end of January it is going retrograde, and broadly the influence of the retrograde and the shadow goes on till the 11th of March. So I think be careful about expending unnecessarily during that period of time, or if you do splash out on anything, make sure that you analyse the receipt to ensure that everything is in order. But that takes us into the first lunation of the year, which occurs on the 26th of May, and big lunation. And this is going to be squaring up to Jupiter in the sign of Pisces. And for you, this lunation does occur in the sign of Sagittarius, so that 12th house energy. So things could take on a bit of an unreality at one level in the following 6 months, but then we have the solar eclipse coming in on the 10th of June, bringing you back into greater reality, because it's in the 6th house of practicalities. But that's in a conjunction with Mercury in retrograde and squaring up with Neptune in Pisces. So some information that's shared with you in the second half of this year may not be very accurate. In fact, someone could be darn right dishonest. Or if you're attracted to a way of doing things, or a new philosophy around diet, for example, I'd be very cautious, because someone could be quite inspirational and call out in a motivational way to the kind of things we all want to do, which is to lose a few pounds, get more agile, supple, and all the rest of it. That kind of stuff may look good on the surface, but I wouldn't believe the advertising too much. But if you are making some practical changes on the back of that solar eclipse, that can be a very positive time to embrace them. But I think Jupiter coming back into Aquarius from the start of August is going to be a fine opportunity to start to manifest greater improvements in terms of your revenue. Now, your themes continue on this basis for the latter part of the year, but because of the practicality of that solar eclipse, it's just saying to you, do stay mindful of that more spiritual dimension that came through from that solar eclipse of last year on the 14th of December, and of course from the lunar lunation, which occurs on the 26th of May. So just staying in touch with the more sensitive side of your nature. It's not just about function, it is about form for you this year. But on the 19th of November, well, we do have a very important lunar eclipse, but this occurs in the sign of Taurus, which of course is your sister Earth sign. And this is kind of interesting, this one, because it's sort of saying to you that you may have to toggle your attention when it comes to marshalling your energies. You can't please all of the people all of the time. It's a lesson we all constantly have to learn. And especially if you are a very sociable Capricorn, and of course you do often have a brilliant sense of humour, and if you are very sociable, I feel that maybe there's the chance that you're spreading yourself a little bit too thin. And also Saturn in the second house may be calling out to you to modify your intake of anything that might be vastly enjoyable but also potentially toxic. So you can imagine what the list would be there, anything from calorific goodies all the way down. So I think that Saturn could push you to be a bit more cautious about what you eat and drink. And then this particular lunation is saying to you, look, are you spending time with? Are there people that are good for you in terms of an energetic exchange? It's not just who we like. There are loads of people we can like, but are they people that really lift us up? Or are they people that takes a little bit more from us? That may be something you're assessing in the last quarter of the year, to be honest. Now, Venus is actually going to be moving into your sign in December, and it's going to be conjunct Pluto. So if you are single, I do feel that you're going to be emanating a very sultry vibe that can draw some magic to you. And with Uranus in your 5th house all year, your love life could be quite unpredictable if you're single or wanting to have a longer term relationship, or if you're in a relationship which is just going through the motions. You could really question the need for it this year, because Uranus is asking you to be as authentic and truthful as possible about the exchange of love. I mean love. I don't mean companionship. I don't mean because you kind of like just rub along and do all the practical stuff. I mean, is that really helping you to meet your heart's desire? Because if it isn't, Uranus is pushing you to leave something that isn't really gratifying you in that way. And I think that this 19th of November lunation is calling out in exactly the same way. It also squares up to Jupiter. So it's kind of saying to you, there may be people that you love spending time with, but maybe it does lead to you doing things that aren't necessarily good for you, drinking to excess and that kind of stuff. All of this is down to a choice. It's not anything I'm telling you to do or the stars are telling you to do. It's what you decide to do based on the information that I am giving you. But on the 4th of December, we do have another lunation. This one a solar eclipse, but it's squaring up with Neptune. So Neptune and Jupiter are super influential this year. And Neptune is in the part of your horoscope to do with your ideas and your thinking. It's also to do with your nervous system. And this solar eclipse is deeply sensitive. So as you come into the end of the year, if you're feeling that you don't have that sense of proprietorial control on your life because you're being pulled in too many different directions, being a people pleaser, a mum, a partner, a sister, a brother, or whatever, then the sensitivity of all this can really come to the fore as the year comes to a close. But fortunately, Jupiter does move back into Pisces in the last 3 days, and that's going to give you a reminder that everything renews in life and in astrology, but we are entering a much more Aquarius time for everybody. So the values of Aquariusness, which is to do with truth, community, fairness, balancing individuality with the collective, about consideration. It's not all about that material plane, which your sign, not necessarily you the individual, but your sign very much represents the kind of status quo. So new energy, new radical energies are coming in, and you're going to experience that as well. But I think essentially your year is about embracing the more spiritual and psychological side of your nature. It's been a real pleasure being with you. I wish you all the best. Stay safe, take care, and goodbye.